The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Lillian Granger stood at the solicitor's office in Bristol, staring at a document that bore her mother's signature. The ink had barely faded, though her mother had passed away almost a month ago. She had expected bank statements, perhaps a modest savings account, or a few pieces of jewelry from her childhood. But this was something else entirely. "You've inherited a property," said Mr. Fenwick, the solicitor, a thin man with round spectacles that always seemed about to slide off. "A small cottage in Hallowbrook, Norfolk." Lillian frowned. "Hallowbrook? I've never heard of it." "Quite. Most people haven't. It's an old village, tucked between forest and marsh. Your mother received it as a gift, many years ago, from a Miss Eliza Wren. No relation noted." "Eliza Wren?" Lillian echoed. "That name means nothing to me." Mr. Fenwick leaned forward. "According to her will, your mother wished you to have it. She wrote that it would make sense one day." Lillian said nothing. There had always been secrets in their home, subtle ones. Locked drawers, unsent letters, stories left unfinished. Now, she was the keeper of yet another mystery. 3 days later, she arrived in Hallowbrook. The village was quiet, almost eerily so. The taxi driver who dropped her at the edge of the lane refused to go further. "That cottage's been empty a long time, miss," he muttered, without meeting her eyes. She walked the rest of the way, luggage bumping along the gravel path, mist clinging low to the hedgerows. And then she saw it. The cottage stood apart from the rest of the village, half shrouded in ivy and framed by towering oaks. Its slate roof dipped slightly at one end, and its wooden windows seemed almost like eyes, watching her. She slipped the key into the rusted lock. It turned with a reluctant groan. Inside, dust cloaked every surface. The air smelled of lavender and old paper. Furniture remained, though covered in white sheets, and a fire had long since died in the hearth. Yet something about the place felt lived in. She explored cautiously. A sitting room with lace curtains, a narrow staircase, a bedroom upstairs with a single four-poster bed. In the corner sat a wooden chest. It was locked. That night, she lit candles, wrapped herself in a worn shawl, and sat by the window with a cup of tea gone cold. And that was when it began. A soft knock, barely audible, echoed from the front door. She froze. It came again. 3 measured taps. She rose, heart thumping, and crept to the door. No one was there. Only the mist, thicker now, curling across the threshold like smoke. But as she turned back inside, something caught her eye, scratched faintly into the wood near the frame. A name. L. Wren. The next morning arrived grey and sullen. Hallowbrook remained hushed, as though it too was holding its breath. Lillian had slept poorly. Her dreams had been heavy with whispers, murmurs of words she could not recall but left her with the unease of having been watched. Wrapped in a thick cardigan, she descended the creaking stairs and stared again at the wooden chest in the upstairs bedroom. Its surface was carved with curling vines and faint symbols. She knelt before it and ran her fingers along the lock. It was old. The keyhole was narrow, the metal around it blackened with time. In the kitchen drawer, she had found a bundle of old keys, most of them rusted. She tried each one, heart racing faster with every turn that failed. Until, finally, one clicked. The chest opened with a sigh, as though it had waited. Inside were yellowed papers, a bundle of letters tied with silk ribbon, and a small black journal with a cracked leather cover. She opened it slowly. Eliza Wren, 1892, was scrawled across the first page. Lillian stared at the name. The very same woman who'd gifted the house to her mother. The one no one seemed to know. She turned the pages carefully. The entries were scattered, some written in haste, some in what looked like panic. Mentions of herbs, weather patterns, dreams that predicted accidents. And then a single line, underlined twice. She returned last night. Same face. Different soul. A cold tingle ran up Lillian's spine. She placed the journal aside, heart unsettled, and stepped outside. She needed air. The path into the village was narrow, bordered by tangled hedgerows and trees that bowed under the weight of age. The village square was modest, one pub, a grocer's, a chapel with a crooked bell tower. It was at the pub she saw him. A man, perhaps mid-30s, sat with a mug of coffee, leafing through a book. He looked up as she approached, sharp blue eyes, a face both kind and cautious. "You're not from here," he said, not as an accusation, but a statement of fact. "Just arrived," Lillian replied. "Inherited a cottage." "I'm Lillian." "Vale Cottage?" he asked, raising a brow. She nodded. "I'm Arthur Vale," he said, standing politely. "Yes, I know. The name's a coincidence. I'm a local historian." "You've heard of it?" she asked. He gave a short laugh. "Everyone's heard of that house. But no one really speaks of it. Not anymore." "Why?" He looked around, then gestured for her to sit. "Because people don't like remembering things that feel unfinished." Lillian hesitated, then joined him. Arthur leaned in. "You might want to be careful. Strange things have always happened around that place. Stories go back generations. Lights in the forest. Shadows in the windows when the house is meant to be empty." Lillian swallowed. "Do you know who Eliza Wren was?" Arthur blinked. "Where did you hear that name?" "She owned the house before. She left it to my mother." He was quiet for a moment. "Eliza Wren vanished in 1893, he said at last. Walked into the forest one night and never returned. But here's the odd thing." Lillian leaned closer. "Some say she was seen again. Decades later. Looking exactly the same." Before Lillian could speak, a shadow fell across their table. An old woman stood there, watching her with narrowed eyes. "You shouldn't be here," the woman said, voice like brittle leaves. Excuse me?" Lillian asked. The woman glanced at Arthur. "She's returned." Again. And then, without another word, the old woman turned and walked away, leaving the wind to fill the silence she had left behind. The days that followed brought little comfort. Each night, Lillian heard sounds she could not explain, footsteps on the landing, the faint rustle of fabric behind closed doors, and whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The village remained distant, polite but cool. No one asked her to stay for tea. No one passed by Vale Cottage. And Arthur, though kind, was cautious in his answers. When she showed him the journal, he asked to photograph a few pages, but refused to take it from her hands. "You should be the one reading it," he said. "It came to you for a reason." That afternoon, after another night of poor sleep, Lillian found herself drawn to the small hallway near the stairs. She had passed it many times without noticing what now stood out to her, a narrow, mismatched floorboard near the skirting, as if it had been pried up once before. She fetched a torch, and a blunt knife from the kitchen. With careful pressure, the board gave way. Beneath, the gap was dark and filled with dust. But something caught the light, something wrapped in cloth. She reached in and pulled it out slowly. The bundle was heavier than expected. Inside was a second journal, this one older, bound with rough twine and water-stained along the edges. But it was not Eliza's. This one bore no name, only a single symbol on the cover, a spiral within a circle, drawn in ink that had turned the color of rust. As she opened it, the scent of earth rose from its pages. The entries were sparse, more like observations than thoughts. "She is here again. But not as before. The forest stirs when she dreams. It is not the soul that returns, but the hunger." Lillian shut the book abruptly. That evening, she visited the chapel, hoping for a moment of stillness. The vicar, an elderly man with trembling hands, greeted her but did not smile. "Forgive me," she said gently. "I've just moved into Vale Cottage." His hand stilled on the edge of the pew. "Then may God walk with you, miss. Did you know the woman who lived there?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked. And for a moment, his eyes seemed full of pity. "We do not speak of her," he whispered. "Because she is never gone." As she turned to leave, he called after her. "Miss Granger. If the dreams become too much, do not listen." She stepped out into the dusky light, more confused than ever. That night, the dreams returned, only this time, they were clearer. She was walking through a forest shrouded in silver mist. A woman stood ahead of her, back turned, hair loose and dark. She reached out. But when the woman turned, it was Lillian's own face she saw. Only, colder. Older. And smiling with no warmth. She jolted awake, gasping. Something shifted downstairs. Lillian crept from her bed, bare feet silent on the wooden floor. As she reached the top of the staircase, she saw it. The front door, wide open. Mist rolled through the threshold. And just at the edge of the path, under the shadow of the trees, stood the figure of a woman. Still. Watching. Waiting. Lillian slammed the front door shut and bolted it. Her fingers trembled as she turned the key and slid the latch into place. The silence returned, but it was not the kind that comforted, it pressed against her chest like fog too thick to breathe. She barely slept that night. When dawn came, she sat at the kitchen table, the journal and the second book laid before her. Both seemed to weigh more than paper ever should. Arthur arrived just after 9. She had called him as soon as the sun touched the windowsill. "I saw someone," she said the moment he stepped inside. "Outside the house. A woman. She looked like me." Arthur said nothing at first. He looked around the room, his eyes lingering on the edges of the floor, the ceiling beams, the corners where shadows lingered. "You need to see something," he said at last. "Come with me." They drove east of the village, past a crumbling wall and into the woods. The path grew narrow, then vanished entirely. Arthur led her through the undergrowth until they reached a clearing. In the center stood a ruined cottage. Ivy consumed its stone, but the bones of the building remained, walls partially intact, a hearth blackened with age. "This is Wren Hollow," he said softly. "The original Wren family estate. Burnt down in 1894, a year after Eliza vanished. Some say she returned and set it alight herself." He crouched beside a fallen beam, brushing away moss to reveal a carved stone. The same spiral within a circle. Lillian crouched beside him, fingers brushing the symbol. "She was a herbalist, wasn't she?" Lillian asked. "That's what the villagers believe." Arthur gave a slow nod. "They called her a healer. Others called her something else." He hesitated, then added, "You're not the first to inherit Vale Cottage and come looking for answers." But none of them stayed long. Back at the cottage, Lillian stood in front of the old mirror in the upstairs bedroom. She didn't know why, but something drew her there. Her reflection stared back, tired and pale, but it was hers. Until it moved. Lillian froze. Her reflection, her exact self, tilted its head, just a heartbeat before she did. She stepped back. The reflection smiled. Lillian stumbled from the room, pulse roaring in her ears. Downstairs, she turned every mirror to face the wall. That night, she awoke to the sound of humming. Soft, low, ancient. She followed it downstairs, guided by the glow of candlelight flickering from the sitting room. But no candles had been lit. The light came from the mirror she had turned to the wall, now upright again. The figure inside stood still, humming, her eyes closed. It was her. But older. As if the years had passed for the version inside, not for the one outside. And slowly, that figure opened her eyes and looked directly at her. Morning broke with a sky as white as bone. Mist clung to the trees like cobwebs, and the air outside Vale Cottage felt heavy, as though the forest itself was watching. Lillian stood at the bathroom sink, splashing cold water on her face, trying to erase the image of the woman in the mirror. But as she dabbed her skin with a towel, she paused. There, on her collarbone, was a mark. It hadn't been there yesterday. A faint spiral, no larger than a coin, reddened slightly against her skin. The same spiral as in the journal, as on the stone Arthur had uncovered in the ruins. She stared at it, breath caught in her throat. By the time Arthur returned later that morning, she was already waiting by the door. I have something to show you, she said, pulling back the neckline of her shirt. Arthur paled. That's not a coincidence. What is it? He hesitated. It's a binding mark. A what? Arthur exhaled slowly. In older traditions, especially around Norfolk and Suffolk, symbols were used to anchor spirits. Or memories. Sometimes people. Usually, they were drawn with chalk or blood. But once etched into the body. He didn't finish the sentence. Lillian stepped back, as if the mark had burned her. Someone's bound me to this house. Or to her, Arthur replied grimly. They spent the rest of the day poring through records in Arthur's study. Ancient texts, parish records, handwritten letters preserved in folders that smelled of dust and time. Piece by piece, the past began to speak. Eliza Wren had been born in 1863. She had vanished in 1893, after months of being accused, quietly, and behind closed doors, of witchcraft. Animals dying. Children sickening. Dreams that spread like infection. But what unsettled Lillian most was a passage in a diary written by the village doctor of that time. I treated Miss Wren for the 3rd time this month. She claims not to sleep. That she dreams through another's eyes. I worry she is becoming someone else. Or something else. That night, Lillian walked alone through the garden behind the house, lit only by moonlight. The soil had grown soft with rain. As she passed the stone bench beneath the yew tree, her foot struck something hard. She knelt. Half buried in the dirt was a locket, tarnished with age. She pried it open. Inside was a tiny portrait. The face was hers. But the clothes, Victorian lace, a high collar, dark eyes painted with careful brushstrokes, were from another time. It wasn't a photograph. It was a miniature painting. Her fingers closed around it, and the wind picked up, cold and sudden. Behind her, the cottage lights flickered. And from the forest's edge, a figure began to walk forward, slowly, steadily, emerging from the mist. She wore the same high-collared dress as in the locket. Same eyes. Same face. But she was not Lillian. And she was coming closer. Lillian didn't remember running. Only the cold, the sharp bite of it on her hands, the sound of branches snapping beneath her feet, and the way the moonlight shifted as she burst into the safety of the cottage, slamming the door behind her. Arthur was still in the study. She didn't call out to him. Couldn't. Her breath came in ragged bursts as she locked the door, then leaned against it, heart hammering. But she could still feel it. The presence. Not outside. Inside. The walls around her seemed to tighten, creaking softly, as if adjusting themselves to her fear. The air smelled of earth and old wood. Somewhere above her, a floorboard groaned. And then she heard it. A whisper. At first, it was barely a breath, a trick of the wind, she told herself. Until it came again. Lillian. She turned. The voice came from within the walls. Not loud, but close. Too close. She backed away, slowly, keeping her eyes on the timber-lined hallway. Another whisper followed, this time longer. She took something that was never hers. The candle on the windowsill flickered, though there was no breeze. She wore my face. Lillian stared up the stairs. Something was there, just past the bend in the corridor, where the shadows pulled and no light dared reach. She gathered her courage and climbed, step by step, each creak beneath her feet echoing through the silence. At the top, she turned to the master bedroom. It was freezing. She could see her breath in the air. On the far wall, the wardrobe door stood ajar. Inside, a faint sound, like breathing. She reached out with trembling fingers and flung it open. Nothing. Just coats. Dust. An old perfume bottle long empty. But the mirror across the room had changed. It no longer showed the bed behind her, but a stone room, underground, its walls slick with moss and candlelit shadows. Chains hung from iron rings, and a figure crouched in the corner, rocking gently. Her. Or someone who looked like her. And the figure turned, and smiled. Lillian stumbled backward. Her shoulder struck the doorframe, and the mirror shattered. At that very moment, Arthur burst into the room. Lillian! I heard. He stopped. Looked from the shards of glass to her pale face. You saw her, didn't you? Lillian could barely speak. She was me, she whispered. But she wasn't. She smiled at me like I belonged to her. Arthur nodded grimly. Then we've gone too far. She's trying to come through. Lillian's mouth went dry. Come through what? She's not just a memory trapped in this place. Eliza Wren, she's looking for a vessel. She's using the bond. Lillian's hand went to the mark on her skin. She's already inside me. Arthur didn't deny it. Instead, he walked to the wardrobe, cleared the coats aside, and pressed against the back panel. A soft click. The panel swung inward. Behind it, a narrow staircase spiraled downward into darkness. She left more than memories in this house, Arthur said. And if we don't face what's buried, he added, you won't be the one standing here much longer. The narrow staircase was colder than the rest of the house. The air, damp and bitter, clung to Lillian's skin as she descended, one hand trailing along the mossy stone wall. Arthur followed close behind, a torch in hand, its flame sputtering with every gust that rose from the deep. How far down does it go? She asked, her voice no louder than a breath. I do not know, Arthur replied. I only found the entrance. I've never had the courage to follow it. Lillian looked back at him, startled. You waited for me. Arthur didn't answer. But she saw the truth in his silence. They reached the bottom after what felt like an eternity. The passage opened into a cavernous chamber lined with ancient bricks. In the center stood an altar, weathered, scorched at its edges, and draped with decaying lace. All around were remnants of the past. A child's broken doll. A wedding veil. A silver hand mirror, cracked and spotted with age. And above it all, carved into the stone, was a name. Eliza Wren. Lillian shivered. Her skin prickled, though the chamber held no wind. Arthur approached the altar. This was hers. Not just a hiding place. A sanctuary. Or maybe a prison. Lillian wandered the perimeter of the chamber, her fingers brushing across old objects. Her reflection in the broken mirror shimmered, then changed. It was her face again, but with sunken cheeks, hollow eyes, a twisted smile. And then the voice returned, louder now. Stronger. Why did you come, Lillian? The torches on the walls flared violently, casting wild shadows across the room. She was chosen, not you. Arthur turned sharply. She's awake. Whatever's keeping her here, it's weakening. The ground beneath them rumbled faintly. Lillian stumbled back, steadying herself against the wall. She wants to cross, she said. She needs me to finish the restoration, to open something. Arthur nodded grimly. The final part of the plan. She was always drawn to architects. Women who build. Who shape. Lillian looked at the altar. What do we do? Before Arthur could answer, the chamber groaned, a low, aching sound, as though the stones themselves were alive. From the far side, the shadows deepened, and a shape stepped forward. It was a woman. Same height as Lillian. Same hair. Same eyes. Only her movements were wrong, jerky, inhuman, like a marionette dragged forward by invisible strings. Lillian gasped. She's free. The figure smiled, tilting its head. No, darling, the voice purred, now perfectly clear. You are. And with that, the door behind them slammed shut. The air inside the chamber thickened, pulsing with a strange rhythm, like the heartbeat of something ancient and furious. Lillian pressed her back against the stone wall, her breath catching in her throat. The figure before them, her mirror image, yet warped, began to glide forward, one slow, deliberate step at a time. Arthur raised the torch between them. Stay back, he shouted, though his voice trembled. But the woman, Eliza, or what was left of her, didn't flinch. Her eyes were fixed on Lillian. You finished what I began, she said, voice echoing with multiple tones. You drew the blood of memory back into these walls. Lillian's fingers grazed the locket at her neck, her mother's locket. Something inside it hummed now, a subtle warmth against her palm. This was never about restoring a house, she whispered. It was about resurrecting a soul. Exactly. Eliza smiled. The walls around them shivered, stones groaning under invisible weight. The altar began to glow faintly, casting a golden light over the chamber. Arthur stepped closer to Lillian, his eyes wide. She's feeding from the house itself. You've brought the manor back to life, and her with it. But why me? Lillian asked, desperation rising. Because you are what remains of me, Eliza said. You are the vessel that forgot. Suddenly, the memories that had haunted Lillian's dreams, burning, drowning, running, coalesced in her mind. She saw Eliza in another time, hiding in the house, chased by villagers who feared her power. And she saw a child, barely a year old, slipped through a secret passage, placed in a basket, taken far away. She saved me, Lillian breathed. You're not my ancestor. You were my mother's. Eliza nodded. I protected our blood once. Now you must do the same. The house trembled again, this time violently. Cracks tore through the walls, and the altar split down the center. Arthur grabbed Lillian's arm. She's going to tear the house apart if she can't pass through you. You have to stop this. But Eliza's expression shifted, softened. She stepped back, arms lowering to her sides. I needed to be remembered, she said. That was all. I needed to know I wasn't erased. With that, she turned to the altar and placed her hand upon it. The light flared white-hot, blinding. Lillian shielded her eyes. A long breath filled the chamber, one final sigh from the stones themselves. Then silence. When Lillian opened her eyes, the altar was empty. No Eliza. No shadow. No voice. Just a faded inscription, newly visible beneath the cracked stone. She endured. She remembered. She forgave. Lillian fell to her knees, overwhelmed. Arthur knelt beside her. It's over. She shook her head slowly. No. It's begun. Above them, they heard the faint sound of the front door creaking open, as though the manor itself had exhaled. They rose, climbing the stairs together, hand in hand. The house, once silent and cold, now felt warm. Lived in. Watching. Waiting. As they stepped into the sunlight pouring through the tall windows, Lillian turned back one last time. The portrait in the hall had changed. No longer empty-eyed or lifeless. Now, the woman in the frame, Eliza, smiled softly, her gaze fixed lovingly on the viewer. On her bloodline. On her home. The house that had waited,